Now, we all know, Bob, that as a business, when the fight is big enough, you've worked with Don King, you've worked with De La Hoya, even Al Heyman. How do you make this happen?
Al Heyman, he refuses to allow any of his fighters to get beat by a top-ranked fighter. And if Terrence fights Errol Spence, there's one winner, and that's Terrence Crawford. That's Terrence Crawford. That's Terrence Crawford. That's Terrence Crawford fights Errol Spence. There's one winner, and that's Terrence Crawford. And Al Heyman refuses to allow it.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
You see a Porter fight happening in 2020?
I'm going to talk to Al about that. I think at first they're very good friends, so they were talking about not fighting each other. Now apparently they're talking about they would fight each other. So now we'll see if we can make that match.
Now, this soundbite, this interview with Bob Arum should come as welcome news to Terrence Crawford's critics, his biggest detractors.
It should.
That there is a possibility that the WBO welterweight champion could be taking on Sean Showtime Porter sometime next year, per Bob Arum. Bob Arum, who discussed a meeting that he had with Al Heyman in regards to another fight between the two separate parties, the Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder rematch.
When we had a meeting with Al on this fight, Fury and Wilder, I threw out the fact, this is before the accident, let's also discuss Terrence and Errol Spence. And he said, fine, that's a good fight for next year, meaning 2020. And then Errol Spence had that accident, and he's not, I think, going to be around for a while. So, you know, when you look at who Al has in the welterweight, the only one of interest, for me, I've learned one thing, that a fight really doesn't sell unless it's close to 50-50. 50-50, 6-5, 7-5, then you know you got something. Because then people are going to bet. If it's a 10-1 fight, now, I think Porter and Crawford will be within that margin, 8-5 or something like that.
I actually happen to agree with those sentiments. I'd give Sean Porter better odds to give Terrence Crawford a fight, a good fight, a hard fight. More so than Danny Garcia.
Yeah.
More so than Keith Thurman.
Yeah.
Not that either of those guys actually want that fight. They clearly don't. I said it before, I'll say it again. Danny Garcia had the opportunity to have that fight. He did, and he chose to sit the rest of 2019 out. It is what it is. When you want to fight, you get to fight. If you don't want to fight, you don't get to fight. It's that fucking simple. It's not like he was busy doing something else.
He wasn't.
But I'd give Sean better odds to give Terrence Crawford a fight, a hard fight, more so than those guys. I think that makes for a titillating match, a sensational fight, for Terrence Crawford to really show his shit in front of the eyes of his critics. And it's his critics that I focus on right now because these guys got the most fucking shit to say about this weekend's fight, about this weekend's card. They're doing everything they can to downplay it. They're trying to blame Top Rank for this and that. Yet here we see that Top Rank is open to working with others. They're trying to get this guy to good fights. They're doing what they can. But there's only so much they can do on their end to make those things happen. It takes two to tango.
It's never been different.
Now, at least according to Bob Arum, you know, old Al Heyman, he was receptive to the Crawford versus Spence fight for next year, which we're about to be in. He was receptive to that, but for the car crash. Now, if he was receptive to that, if that checks out, then there's no reason he shouldn't be receptive to working with Top Rank to make Crawford versus Porter.
Make it happen.
That could be yet another pay-per-view opportunity for Sean Porter. Whether or not he deserves it, I'll leave such judgments up to you guys, because essentially he's being afforded 2 world title opportunities in what are 2 back-to-back pay-per-views consecutively. That seems to be the pecking order. That seems to be the sequence. He'd go from being on a pay-per-view with Spence to being on a pay-per-view with Crawford. I'll tell you whether or not he deserves it, that's entirely up to you. I'll leave such judgments up to you. But I like the proposition of the fight. I like what it could mean for Terrence Crawford. The thing is, though, in the back of my mind, I know that even if Terrence Crawford goes out there and looks sensational, stays in character, he stays the same guy that he's always been, if he looks better against Sean Porter than anybody else has before him, do you think that this will allay his critics?
Nope.
No, it won't. They'll just try to find some kind of way to diminish that. That's the reality of it. Because the reality of it is, they keep saying that Terrence Crawford hasn't proven anything in the welterweight division, while simultaneously
Supporting the fuckery.
supporting the people that won't allow him to prove anything. I mean, if you want him to prove something, then you should be advocating that those PBC welterweights fight him. If you're saying he's unproven, if you're saying he hasn't beaten anybody as a welterweight, hell, there's some people that say he hasn't beaten anybody at all. I don't agree with those people, but better still, for those people that think Terrence Crawford still has something to prove, okay, if you think he has something to prove, then why don't you put some pressure on those guys so that he can prove it? He's receptive to those fights. Bob Arum is receptive to those fights. So dispense the pressure and the criticism evenly. If you want him to prove something against the PBC stable of welterweights, then you need to advocate that they give him that opportunity, not freeze him out. Doesn't make sense. You criticize the guy for who he's not fighting while making excuses for the people that don't want to fight him. Already heard Keith Thurman's bullshit-ass excuse. Oh, you wanted a Pacquiao fight, right? I guess that's why you didn't fight Terrence Crawford in spite of talking all that fucking shit. To the media, to the public, in full view of the public eye, you're talking shit about that man. But I guess the reason you didn't actually fight that man is because you were waiting for that Pacquiao fight, that Pacquiao sweepstakes. Okay, well, you done had the Pacquiao fight now.
It's done.
You done had that fight. So now that that fight has come and gone,
Will you fight him now?
should we expect to see Keith Thurman fighting Terrence Crawford in 2020? Y'all know the answer. Y'all know the fucking answer.
Fuck no.
It's the kind of shit that goes on with the PBC. And it's for this reason, the only guy who I can think of who might actually fight Terrence Crawford, who might take on that challenge, the only guy who I can think of that would do it is Sean Porter. Because Keith Thurman's full of shit. Right, there's a guy right there on the same side of the street as Keith Thurman that he didn't want to fucking fight. So clearly it ain't about sides of the fucking street when Keith and Errol, they are on the same side of the street, and Keith just didn't want that fucking fight. He didn't want that shit. They're on the same side of the street. Danny, we already talked about how he passed on this opportunity, okay? Sean's the only guy who I can think of with the PBC that would actually take on that fight. I think he would. But I also happen to think that he would give Crawford a better fight, a stiffer test, than either Danny Garcia or Keith Thurman. So make the fucking fight. Make the fight. It just sickens me to see
It's fucking bullshit.
members of the media, like Mike fucking Coppinger, you know, that piece of shit. It sickens me to see members of the media and quote-unquote boxing fans actually advocate that the PBC freeze Terrence Crawford out while simultaneously criticizing him for who he is fighting. Who the fuck is he supposed to fight if you guys want the PBC to freeze him out?
Jackasses.
They say that Crawford hasn't proven anything, when in reality what they're really saying is they don't want him to prove anything. They don't actually want Terrence Crawford to lock horns with the PBC stable of welterweights. And that's become abundantly clear with the conflicted statements these people make. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a sport of boxing. There are no sides of the street. It's the best versus the best. And if the best of Top Rank has to fight the best of the PBC, then so fucking be it. You guys are just afraid of what might happen if it comes to that. So you advocate for the fuckery. You advocate for the politics. You make every stupid excuse in the fucking book for people not to fight Terrence Crawford and then say he hasn't fought anybody. Well, who the fuck's he gonna fight if they won't fight him? Do you know that there are reports circulating right now, due to some recent comments from Terrence Crawford, that after this title defense against Egidijus Kavaliauskas, provided that he wins, and we all think he will.
Yeah, we do.
But provided he wins, he plans on going up to middleweight, 160,
No way.
after this fight. And I saw these comments, I saw these reports, and I thought to myself, I hope he's joking. I hope that this is just a tongue-in-cheek kind of comment intended to denote the situation at 147, that for all these talented, quote-unquote, talented motherfuckers in this division, none of them seem to want to fight me, so I might as well go up to middleweight. Hopefully if I go up there, maybe people will be more willing, more so than these guys. I hope that it was just a joke. I hope it was that kind of a comment, because I don't think Terrence Crawford is ready to campaign as a middleweight, and if he did so decide to go up there, history would be repeating itself in more ways than one. There was another guy who ended up jumping 2 weight classes as a result of being frozen out by the PBC. A guy who was deprived of fights in all the ways that Terence Crawford is being deprived of fights. And that guy's name is Guillermo Rigondeaux. Okay, guy who was supposed to fight Leo Santa Cruz, and at least according to Leo Santa Cruz, Al Heyman was the reason that the fight never came off. Al Heyman was the reason that the fight didn't happen. Said that people weren't interested in that fight, which is eerily similar of what, we hear people saying over there at the PBC, that I guess they think that people are more interested in watching Errol Spence fight a Mikey Garcia than a Terence Crawford, a champion at his own weight. This would be history repeating itself if Terence Crawford so decided to jump up 2 weight classes when, I don't think he's ready to be campaigning as a middleweight in all the ways that Guillermo Rigondeaux jumped up 2 weight classes, up there to 130 for that Vasyl Lomachenko fight. Those kinds of broad leaps are ill-advised, whether it's Terence Crawford or Guillermo Rigondeaux. One might feel so inclined to ask as to why Terence Crawford would skip junior middleweight altogether. I mean, if you're going to move up, why not just move up to the next weight class? Why go all the way up there to 160? And it's because at 154, he'd be facing the same issues he's facing at 147. That most of the ponies in the show, most of the who's who guys at 154, they're PBC fighters. And the PBC might so decide to freeze him out of 154 in all the ways they've frozen him out of 147. Thus, the only alternative is to go to a weight class where they don't have all the star players, where they don't have all the ponies in the show. And that division, well, it's 2 divisions upstairs at 160. I'm just hoping that this doesn't materialize. I'm hoping that this doesn't happen, that it doesn't go down this way. That these preliminary rumblings of what could be a Sean Porter fight in 2020, I'm hoping they materialize. I'm really frustrated with this situation, I am. It's a disgusting situation for what is a very competitive sport, or what is supposed to be a very competitive sport, that you actually have athletes, fighters, using the politics of boxing as an avenue of opportunity to circumvent what is a great fighter, one of the most accomplished fighters fighting today. That a fighter the caliber of Terence Crawford should find himself in this situation after so many people were vigorously calling on him to move up and take on the killers at 147, only for those quote-unquote killers to part like a river around a rock as soon as he gets there. That there are actually quote-unquote boxing fans that are okay with this bullshit because they think they're honorary members of the PBC. And these guys, they're just as harebrained and stupid as that Fred guy, Barbershop Hallucinations, caping for the PBC just to be denied media credentials by one of their staff members. I mean, you gotta be a fucking idiot to be of that school of thought. But that's the generation of boxing fans we're dealing with. And what passes for journalism these days is an even bigger fucking joke. A guy like Mike Coppinger, considering himself any kind of a boxing writer, making no light of the offers that were sent out to PBC welterweights, making no light that Keith Thurman was contacted, Danny Garcia was contacted. Before the car crash, Errol Spence was vigorously, publicly sought out, and none of these guys were interested in fighting Crawford. And this asshole actually has the nerve to attribute Crawford's situation to him? So it's got nothing to do with the PBC freezing him out, right? It's all Terence Crawford and Bob Arum's fault. And this piece of trash
is a writer,
is what passes for a journalist these days. This piece of trash is what passes for a boxing writer. Ladies and gentlemen, boxing deserves better than guys like Mike Coppinger. It does. A guy who we all know fabricated pay-per-view numbers, because in all my years of watching this sport, I've never seen pay-per-view buys come out 2 days, only 2 days after a fight. And this is what passes for a journalist these days. This is what passes for a boxing pundit. A guy who will sit there on Twitter asking, who is Crawford beat, get this, compared to Danny Garcia. Oh, because Danny Garcia,
he's a killer.
Oh yeah, he's all about the action, right? That's why he passed on a fight with Terence Crawford. For Adrian Granados, no less. And even if he couldn't have taken the Crawford offer because the Granados fight was already done, hey, you had the whole rest of 2019 to fight Terence Crawford. You just didn't want to. Apparently, you're more interested in Ivan Redkach. Mike takes no issue with that. Who has Crawford beat? Let's see. He beat Victor Postol, the undefeated WBC champion at the time. That's who he beat. And that just so happens to be the same guy that Danny Garcia paid to step aside. I guess nobody told Mike. Terrence Crawford beat Jeff Horn. Oh, and I know, nobody seems to think much of Jeff Horn, but the reality of it is, when Jeff Horn fought Manny Pacquiao, Jeff Horn left with a belt. When Keith Thurman fought Manny Pacquiao, he left with nothing.
I'm lying.
Now, that same Jeff Horn that left with Manny Pacquiao's belt, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, that same Jeff Horn that left with Manny's belt, well, he couldn't do a goddamn fucking thing with Terrence Crawford, not a goddamn fucking thing, okay? That's the reality of it. I mean, comparatively, if you look at both performances between how Horn did with Manny and how Keefe did with Manny, Horn actually looked better, albeit crude. He did better. He didn't get knocked on his ass, I'll tell you that fucking shit. But guys like Mike, journalists, quote-unquote pundits like Mike, they've no memory of these matters of fact. But I guess, in Mike Coppinger's world,
Special K.
beating Kell Brook right off a 5-round ass-whooping from Gennady Golovkin, that's supposed to be better than unifying an entire weight class, right? I mean, it must be. You know, it seems like a lot of PBC's supporters have no recollection of Golovkin versus Brook. They must not. That's the fight that Brook was in right before he fought Spence. And that's a fight where Gennady Golovkin wiped his whole ass with the guy and sent him packing back down to welterweight. That's what happened. And beating Kell Brook right after that, Spence beating Brook under those circumstances, that's better than Crawford fighting 2 undefeated champions and unifying a whole weight class. I mean, Mike must be more of a proponent of hashtags as opposed to action. You know, when you say it's strap season, people are actually expecting you to get all the straps. Terrence Crawford's done that, but not a single guy in the PBC roster can say the same. And low old Mike Coppinger, he makes no light of this either. Ladies and gentlemen, in light of these comments from what's supposed to be a pundit, wouldn't you guys agree that boxing deserves better coverage than what Mike Coppinger's providing? That's all I'm saying. Tell the truth. The whole truth. Not just what they're paying you to say, but the actual truth. That there's only one boogeyman in the welterweight division. That boogeyman's name is Terrence Crawford.